Hi, I'm Reed, this is Crowland Publishing, and welcome back to our Folklore Thursdays, in which we take folklore, mythology, history, religion, custom, all that stuff, and steal it for our D&D games and our TTRPG games. And today we're talking about the Wicker Man. We're talking about human sacrifice, and perhaps the most famous forms of all human sacrifice. The Wicker Man is the enduring symbol of the darkness in what we project onto our imagination, our darkest ideas of paganism. Now, Wicker Men, I'm going to put a photo of now, was supposedly a structure in which the ancient Celts of modern France and Belgium were said to imprison local criminals. Then, as a sacrifice to the gods, they would set them alight, which is pretty horrific. And if no prisoners were around, slaves would go in. And this was done by the religious order of Druids. I've done a video on Druids, playing them and then putting them into your D&D and using their traditions. And I'll dig it up and I'll put it here around here somewhere. Now, before we get too far into this video about the Wicker Man, we should point out that it might not have actually ever existed. The problem is the person who records the Wicker Man existing is Julius Caesar. And around 58 BCE, Caesar's broke, he needs money to fund his political ambition, so he takes the difficult job of putting down the famously tough Celts, and the Celts are causing problems to the Roman Empire for a long time. Now, Caesar's a genius, he does this. And it's a very well-known campaign, and Caesar's actually recording a lot of his thoughts into a book called The Conquest of Gaul. And in that book, he's not actually that interested in providing an account of history, as he is making himself look good to his fellow Romans. And so he makes the Celts scary and barbaric and horrific, despite them being in many ways far more progressive and fair and humanist than Rome. But did the Celts actually practice human sacrifice? Well, yes, they absolutely did. Was it a Wicker Man? Maybe not, maybe so. It's really hard to verify. Not a lot of archaeological evidence in a bit of wood that you set on fire. However, loads of historians at the time said that the Romans did do human sacrifices, and we do have loads of evidence, archaeological evidence that it did happen, but only Caesar talks about actual Wicker Man. So let's talk about two examples of well-known human sacrifice amongst the Celts that were not Wicker Men. Now, before we get into this, yes, some of this is pretty gory, so trigger warning for horrible human sacrifice, I suppose. Anyway, old Crogan Man. He was a king. He was 6'6" tall, which was a giant for the day. And all right, here he comes. He had holes cut in his upper arms through which a rope was pulled to restrain him. He was then stabbed repeatedly. Someone chopped his nipples off. Then he was cut in half. Now, in some cultures, you literally sucked on a king's nipples to show your submission, including the Celts. So there's a Pogue song in that for you. But the idea is that whatever was going on with old Crogan Man, they absolutely wanted to destroy his kingship in this world and in the next. Then he was cut in half and thrown into a bog. Clonacavin Man, he was a tiny 5'5", or less, and he rarely ate meat, so he might not have been a king, it's hard to tell. He was disemboweled, someone then hit him in the head with an axe a few times, then he was hit in the body, then he had his nipples cut off. Maybe he was a much poorer king, hard to tell. But that is what human sacrifice looked like. So those are archaeologically verifiable, two of many. But there are also mythological stories. And one of them that's of particular interest to us here is that the high king of the small kingdom of Temer, Tiganmas, now he worshipped the dark god Cromcruach. And he ordered the children be killed as a sacrifice to this dark god. Now I've heard two stories of how this all ended up. And the first, and probably the most well-known, is that St. Patrick, patron saint of Ireland, comes in and says, right, throw down that evil king. God said, stop this. And the other is that the Druids rose up to end the sacrifice practice. So there is a counter-narrative where Druids are like, no, you're doing human sacrifices wrong. And about 1,000 years after Julius Caesar's running around, there's a book called the Commenta Berenicia, also known as the Bern Scholia. And it doesn't talk about Wicker Man, but it talks about how the different gods received sacrifices in different ways. Some were hanged, some were drowned, and some were tied to what is called a mannequin, so probably something like a scarecrow, and then set on fire, which is horrible, but that might have been the origin of the Wicker Man. So why do human sacrifices, though? Well, loads of reasons. The Aztecs sacrificed people, ripping out their hearts and skinning them and wearing the skin, specifically to worship this corn god. So you cut the skins off because you shuck a corn. And without the rain that you're sacrificing to, no crop, loads of death. They also thought that the sun bled out and needed new blood, literally. The Roman historian Strabo talks about the Celts shooting prisoners full of arrows, which is actually an ancient Neanderthal custom. And then they would use the this is cool. Then they would use the death spasms as a form of divination. That is a good trait to give to a bad guy. The Chinese used to ritually sacrifice people to be slaves in the afterlife. So did the Egyptian. This is awful. This creeps me out. In Cahokia, a Native American city, they beat people to death and then threw them into a big old pit. We have evidence that people lived and tried to climb out of this big mass of dead bodies. Now, a lot of times human sacrifices are really communal events, either to show the community the terrible cost of getting out of line, of not being a part of the community, or a grave responsibility of the nobility to the land and to the world and to the community as a whole. I am the king, I will sacrifice myself to give life to everyone. And of course, we've talked about this before, pagan festivals were celebrations. They were a huge break from the fairly humdrum and demanding world of ancient history. It was hard, it was rough, there was no aspirin. And so to see intense and raw displays of emotion, suffering, knowing, feeling the divine power. If you've ever been to Mass, especially a beautiful formal Mass with singing and rituals, you will understand about the communal power. Even a football game or a concert, the vast emotions of a body of people. That's what human sacrifice exists for, this enormous wash of power, of communal energy between people. So Samhain, spelled Samhain for some stupid reason, but it's pronounced Samhain. It's the basis of Halloween. And did it have Wicker Man? No, probably not. But it did have a lot of the stuff we now know as a part of Halloween, which is called guising, which is dressing up to scare off evil spirits. I should do a video on costumes one day. I'm quite a fan of them. So Samhain was the night when the dead could walk and the spirits, the she, could come into the world. So this was a night where humans were at a lot of risk from supernatural powers. So the big thing was huge bonfires. You wanted lots and lots of light to frighten off the dead. That's why people wore costumes. They were apotropaic magic. They were designed to scare off the dead. And again, immediately, here are gameable ideas. The idea of wearing special costumes, the idea that on special nights, all the powers of darkness come into the world. For example, Samhain was said to be the night that kids sacrificed kids to Crom Cruach, so it had a dark reputation, sort of, even during the stories of the time. And a lot of neo-pagans like to sort of sue this over, but it was a scary night for the Celts. Now, we can't date exactly what night a human sacrifice might occur, but a night like Samhain, a night of occult power, a night where the fires burn, a night where everyone is already in their bizarre and horrible costumes, might very well have been a time when communities came together and committed the terrible acts of sacrifice that keep humanity alive. Like Brecht said, what keeps mankind alive is bestial acts, and it's on these dark nights that we commit the terrible crime of lighting the Wicker Man. And we can steal all that for our RPG hooks. So here we go, 5 Wicker Man related RPG hooks. Number 1, the gods can be cruel and needy and are always searching for blood. So if you have players who have taken captives, maybe they've just taken some orcs captive, maybe some bandits, whatever, the local druids or dark priests approach them and say, look, please give us the prisoners. Winter's coming on, and we could really use the help convincing the gods to make this winter mild. And we're going to sacrifice them and pour their blood into a field or set them on fire in a Wicker Man. So what are you going to do? Do you help the community because you know it works? Or do you say, look, no, we don't sacrifice to gods. What does your local cleric in the party think about that, or paladin? So again, immediately you put your PCs in a position, do we help or do we hinder? Number 2, have you ever read a Clive Barker story called In the Hills, the Cities? It's creepy. It's a dark night. It's scary. It's the darkest night of the year. Halloween, Samhain. Suddenly, a Wicker Man runs through the forest. It's running around. You see it grabbing sacrifices, putting sacrifices directly into its body, killing them. So obviously that's a scary monster thing. It's a giant 20-foot tall wicker golem. So you put it down. Or you at least try to put it down. But the Wicker Man is doing is that it's increasing its own powers. It's increasing its own strength. It's just sacrificing people. It's just been automated to do it by itself, because the dark powers of Fae or Undeath or Hell are coming. So do you let it power up on human suffering and human death, or do you maybe do the job for it? Number 3, a simple local adventure. Someone spotted a ghost in the local castle. Please go and check it out for us. Easy peasy, squeeze the lemon. Typical D&D adventure. And there indeed you see ghosts. But the thing is that these ghosts were sacrificial victims. Not long ago, but 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the local village in which your PCs are based needed to sacrifice a whole bunch of people to the powers of darkness. Maybe it was a good reason, like they needed the power to protect from an invasion of orcs or spirits or dead or whatever. Maybe they just wanted money. Maybe it was just to propitiate a god who would give them a bountiful harvest. Either way, these ghosts feel angry, and maybe they are justified in saying we want revenge for our human sacrifice. And the dark powers who originally accepted the sacrifice are hungry again. Number 4. The players are invited to be guests of a festival. Perhaps you do a one-shot where you see off bandits or orcs or whatever, and the next session it's a big party. Yay! You saved us, thank you very much. You good adventurers, you. But you build up that festival is increasingly eerie. The dancing becomes more and more ritualistic. The masks come on and it's all fox and rabbit and weird games of the children hunt other children and then ritually eat them. And then the local effigies come out and they look like the PCs. And they're being burnt into the fire. And you've been drinking all night and slowly your PCs are getting drugged. And then at midnight, the Wicker Man is brought out and the PCs, well. Number 5. It is the dark of winter and the king must die. The king or the queen or the princess or whoever must go into the Wicker Man and be burnt so that the fish may return to the streams, the lambs will be born healthy, and the harvest will be bountiful. But what if the PCs are allies to the king or simply new to the region and they just did not see this kind of activity coming? If they let the king die, maybe the gods will be kind. I mean, they have been for thousands of years. If they help him survive, they might alienate the gods and they'll certainly alienate the priests and the culture. So this is the sort of adventure where the morality of your PCs, your players at the table, and the game world can all clash. Now, I love that kind of deep drama, but sometimes people just want to pretend to be golden sword astronauts having fun adventures in the year 3000 and not getting into horrible religious and moral quandaries. So it's up to you. But I have actually run adventures like that, and I think it works out really, really well. So there we have it. 5 Wicker Man hooks, 5 Wicker Man adventures. I'm Reed. This is Crowland Publishing. Why don't you give us a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.